Can everyone see my screen? Yes. Okay, perfect. Mhm. Okay, sorry. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Maite Sanchez, and hopefully you can hear me. I'm using my laptop to speak, but I'm gonna enunciate as best as possible. But my name is Maite Sanchez, and I am the Student Academic Advisor for the Life Science Core Department. And so right now I'm going to my second year with the working with the LS Core, but my experience wasn't always working in higher education and retention. So today I'm going to be talking about how some of my past experiences in college access have informed my advising approaches and how it informed me as I went through the A's cohort and I worked to develop a new process for our articulation requests. So
Maite,
before I,
sorry, real quick. We see your speaker notes and your
oh
presentations in
really?
the back.
What about, do you see the little one or the big one?
We see both.
Or
Well, I
both?
see both. I think we see
Hmm.
both, yeah.
What about now?
Now I just see
If you
your
still see
presentation.
both. Okay.
I see one now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So sorry about that. So before I get too much into talking about articulation requests, um, I want to share a little bit more about myself. So before I joined the Ellis Corps, I was working with USC, and before that, I was actually a UCLA alum, class of 2023. I'm a first generation student, and that's something that I really look towards when looking at my advising approach and how I support students. Um, Before joining the LS Corps, I had worked with several college access organizations. So this is my first time working in retention. And so I was working with UCLA AOP as a Bruin advisor, the UCLA SIOC, which is housed within CPO. I also worked with Upper Bound projects, just to name a few things. Um, and then right before joining the Corps, I was working with the USC College Advising Corps as a college advisor. And what I did within that position was support students, high school students, as they kind of navigated the college application process and, we would talk every single day about higher education, their career goals, just pretty much anything that had to do with college. Um, and when I joined the Corps, I felt like there was a pretty stark difference between my past experience and my time as a new advisor. It felt like there wasn't a lot of overlap between access and retention, but that actually ended up not being true, and I'll kind of touch on that a little bit more later. And so, after years of working in college access work, I learned that, and I think a lot of us can attest to this, but college is extremely scary and confusing. And I think that's something that noticed in a lot of my students prior to even getting to higher education. A lot of them weren't just scared of applying to college and writing an essay or maybe doing the FAFSA wrong, but it was about navigating an institution as maybe as large as UCLA that was ginormous in comparison to their high schools. And for a lot of the students I was working with, they were first generation, low income, maybe coming from migrant families. So they had really no idea what was in store for them. And so I think I would tell a lot of them, talk to your SAOs or talk to the financial aid office. But that's a lot of advice that's easier said than done. And when they come here and they're trying to bridge the gaps, it's really not as clear cut as just talk to your SAO because sometimes they don't even know what those resources could possibly look like or who that resource could be. And so that's a fear of that stays even after their freshman year because they're not going to have it all figured out after their freshman year. And I think as I went through the cohort, that was something that I kind of wanted to tackle. And so part of my position as a SAA within the LS Core is overseeing the entire articulation process. And for those that aren't familiar with articulations, they're essentially the equivalencies or agreements that exist between different colleges and universities and UCLA. Um, so those agreements are what allow maybe a transfer student to transfer in coursework or a UCLA student to take a summer community college class. And then without those agreements, they couldn't really do either of those things. But as I've taken over that process, I've noticed there's plenty of issues. And I think the three you see on the screen are just kind of a handful of everything that I've experienced the past year. So for example, there's data loss, it's extremely time consuming, and I'll kind of cover that a little bit more. And then there's a lot of confusion among students, which was something that I really wanted to tackle on. Um, and so as for data loss, as I worked my way through all the requests and have kind of had to navigate the system that already exists within my department, There's been a lot of things that have come up. So for us, we use an articulation email to look at our requests, and then we kind of keep all of our information there. So that email that you see on the left side is dates back to 2012. So it's kind of a half functional archive, if you will. And then on the right side, you see our Excel sheet, which is what we use to track all articulation requests. Every single thing you see in there is manually entered by myself, and it's very easy to lose track of things. And I've actually hidden a few columns for the sake of um, privacy, but it's a lot to look at, and I'm sure it's not easy on the eyes for anybody else. And so when I took over this and I was being trained, it really did seem like it's a lot to look at, but it can't be, it's kind of like straightforward, but that's coming from an advisor viewpoint. And when I look at it as a student, it's not that straightforward. And so when I was taking over this process, it felt like there has to be some way to make this automated somehow. I just don't know what that could possibly look like. And then as for time consumption, again, it really felt like part of this can be automated somehow, but I still don't know how. And so to give you kind of an example of or an overview of what articulations require, and this is a very nice and clear version of it all. A student will submit something, I'll send that to faculty after reviewing their DAR and screening it. The faculty will review, they'll give me their decision, I'll send the student that decision, I update their XLB screen, so on and so forth. Um, that's if it's approved. And I won't even go into if it's like denied and a student is upset because that's a whole other beast of its own. But one articulation request, if it's approved, requires Outlook, DAR, Excel, Box, well, like 3 or 4 Excel sheets, depending on if it's approved or not, Oasis, and then Counselor Desktop. So it's a lot. And then because communication entirely relies on email, whenever a student forgets a lecture schedule or maybe a lab schedule, it creates even more back and forth between myself, the student, and faculty. And it can lead to a lot of, again, that back and forth. And before you know it, one request now has 10 emails associated with it that I have to somehow track some way. And so that's kind of where we see a lot of that data loss as well. And it's kind of like this cycle. It takes so long to take care of one request that before you know it, something 3 months ago or maybe even 2 weeks ago got lost, and I have to kind of deal with the effects of losing that piece of information, or maybe even the student has to deal with that. And so that was another huge thing that I wanted to tackle. And then I have confusion among students, which I think I see a lot of, especially having done this for about a year now. And so I'm not a biology expert, I am not faculty, but I think I can definitely say that an environmental science course probably will not articulate to a genetics course, or an engineering course will not articulate to a molecular biology lab as much as our students may want it to. And so I feel like I notice a lot of students submitting things without intention, without really going and stopping and thinking, will this have, a genuine possibility to articulate to one of the life site courses. And so I think myself and especially our faculty would appreciate if students could submit courses for review that are a lot more aligned with the course learning outcomes and the course goals rather than just kind of maybe submitting any STEM course that they see in their coursework. And so I think it's also really easy for them to maybe forget to submit a lab schedule or a lecture schedule, and understandably so, because it's like in very fine little print that they need to submit these things for review, and it's really easy for them to miss, and I can't really fault them for that. But that's one of the things that can make something or a review process go from taking a few days or a few weeks to taking weeks to months. And that's kind of where it becomes a much more stressful situation, and why a student doesn't understand why their request hasn't been reviewed when it was submitted 3 months ago. And that's where that frustration comes from, and something that I wanted to tackle as well. And so all of that is to say that after observing all of these issues the past year or so, I can say that I am still not an articulations expert. It is still not an intuitive process for myself, nor is it clear cut. And that goes the same for our students. And I don't expect it to be intuitive or clear cut. Just last week, I had a former student of mine reach out for my time at USC. because she's gearing up to transfer this upcoming year. And she wants to apply to USC. And so she was asking me to check the USC articulations. And I don't know if anyone's ever gone on that website, but it is one of the most confusing things I have ever seen. And I thought ours, I don't know, I was looking at ours and I was like, okay, we're doing pretty good on our end because I don't know what was going on in that form. But I say that because it just really goes to show how not clear cut these things are and how it can become confusing for a student just as it can become advising for myself or for myself who's an advisor. And I have some sort of familiarity with this. And so when I was building the form, it wasn't just like tidy things up for myself and for our advising office, but it was also to make sure that our students started to submit things with a lot more intention. That, again, they weren't submitting that environmental science course for LS7A. Sorry. And so I really reflected on my time in working with high schoolers because, again, they didn't know how to complete or write a college essay and they didn't know how to complete a FAFSA. And that kind of, I guess, resource gap isn't something that's just automatically solved when they transfer to UCLA or whenever they matriculate to UCLA. And so I wanted to make sure that when a student is filling out this form, and if it's the first time they ever submit any sort of petition at their college, it's something that they can do on their own, that they can actually navigate this form and that it's not confusing and that they can understand why maybe they're asked for more information or why maybe their request was denied. But overall, I just wanted to make an overall much more accessible process, especially for those that have never had any sort of experience with college petitions, because I know when I came to UCLA, I had never ever submitted a college petition. And I'm sure that goes for a lot of our students. And so to kind of tackle those problems, and especially minimizing confusion among our students, I built in multiple checkpoints into the form. And so, for example, if a student is trying to petition LS7L, which is our lab course, they would need to include a lab schedule. And so it stops them and asks them, have you included a lab schedule? And if they haven't, they're guided to go back and get one. For LS107, students sometimes try to petition like an introductory biology course, but LS107 is upper division, so it would be kind of automatically denied. So I kind of hoping that in building in these checkpoints, it kind of manages their expectations for the articulation request process. And then apart from that, I also wanted to make sure that any student, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, that has never submitted a petition before and this is their first time ever looking at anything like this, is able to do it on their own. And I was thinking of my own high school students who were really struggling to fill out the FAFSA or maybe struggling to fill out the CADA and had no idea why I was asking them for a 1040 and they didn't know what that was. We're able to look at this articulation process and kind of have it explained to them in the same way. And so I put in example syllabi in here, example lecture schedules, example lecture schedules. I tried to cover every single base that I could think of to make sure that requests were actually being considered and not just automatically turned away or actually had a chance at being approved because a lot of them were just missing key information that it would never be approved and it would just be bounced back to me by our faculty. Apart from that, I'm not going to bore you with all the technical details because there's a lot of formulas that are built into here. But thanks to Bessie, I was able to figure out a single self updating archive that automatically pulls information from the My UCLA form. And so thankfully, I won't have to type in UIDs anymore. I don't have to type in very long college names. Sometimes they're not in English, and that's not fun to type in. And so thankfully, everything is automatically pulled in from that My UCLA form, put into this workflow. Um, and not only does it minimize or completely minimize a risk of data loss, in my opinion, but it also minimizes time consumption because I don't have to go in and type things. Our faculty can type their decision on the My UCLA form and it'll automatically be put into here. And then this is just one piece of it. There's also a case lookup tab that allows me to kind of search up a student or their case number and it'll automatically show me everything from their request, which means that I don't have to dig through those 2012 emails anymore, thankfully. And then I also don't have to go to the box files and try to find something that was uploaded as a PDF several years ago. And so I think my time in the ACE cohort didn't just allow me to kind of create a better functioning workflow for the articulation request process, but it also allowed me to reflect back on my staff journey and coming from being a college advisor and working in college access to now working in retention. It allowed me to realize that a lot of my past experience could serve as a voice to the processes that I was developing within my own current position as an advisor. In my past experiences, I wasn't really afforded a lot of opportunities to kind of develop things. And this is one of the first times where I've ever been encouraged really to create something new, to develop something on my own, and to kind of change the status quo. Because a lot of the processes I presented earlier have been used by our department for so long. And when I noticed that it wasn't the most efficient way possible, I was encouraged to make changes. And when I was working, for example, for LASC, that was not really the case. I had to follow the status quo, and that wasn't a great feeling, really. And so I'd say that my time in the cohort really transformed my role and myself as an advisor because it allowed me to look for areas for not just improvement, but also just overall development within my department. And so while I was actually going through the cohort, I built two other workflows on the side, one for LS495, which our first-time TAs are required to take that course. And most people in the LS division, or most TAs in the LS division will take that as well. And then that actually came in very handy because we had to cancel one section and shift everybody around in a frenzy. So that was great. And I was very grateful to have been in the cohort while that happened. And then I also made a second workflow for our section switches, which has made my life so much easier, and I will continue to do that in the future. And then now I'm looking for other areas where I can continue to grow and continue to develop things, and not just through a workflow or not just through a MyUCLA form, but really in any way that I can. And I just started my second year, so I can only imagine what else I can do within this next year. And I really want to thank Bessie and Shala for kind of showing me everything that I know. And thank you everyone for listening to me ramble about articulations for the past few minutes.